So I want to start by just saying the theme that I've chosen to talk about tonight, the 4 Brahmavihāra qualities of kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, might feel like a lot to cover in just one evening. On the other hand, I'm assuming that most of you here, you already know a little bit about what these 4 Brahmavihāra qualities are, and perhaps have spent at least some time practicing the first one, which is metta, kindness, goodwill, benevolence, universal friendliness. That's what I was focusing on just then. So, as far as I know, probably nobody here has had no experience of these qualities. And if you are feeling new to them, don't worry. I'll give you a little bit of context to start with before we dive into some different ways, perhaps, of approaching them. So in the context of the Western insight tradition that this group is aligned with, as I think you know, there are 2 main forms of meditation practice that we do. We practice mindfulness to develop insight, clear seeing, understanding, wisdom. And we cultivate these 4 heart qualities of kindness and compassion, appreciative joy and equanimity as ways to powerfully support that clear seeing. Now, in the context of the insight tradition, these Brahmavihāra practices have traditionally been taught as ways to develop samadhi, concentration. That's a quality of steadiness, absorption, unification of mind. And that steadiness is what helps insight to arise. And I mentioned that because these Brahmaviharas traditionally have been used to strengthen concentration, they've been taught in a pretty structured, formal way, usually by slowly reciting set phrases to evoke each of the qualities. And then we extend those phrases to include different beings, starting whether it comes most easily, to more neutral, and then to more difficult, and then eventually to all beings. In a similar way, we can progress through the 4 Brahmavihāra themselves. So we start with metta, and then move to compassion, appreciative joy, and then equanimity, balance of mind. And we use slightly different phrases for each of these qualities. So as I'm guessing you're familiar with, metta is kind of a general purpose goodwill or friendliness. Standard phrases similar to what I just used at the end. May you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be happy, may you be free. And you can hear from those phrases how they're pretty universal. And then when we've established this basic quality of kindness, we can turn that metta towards life's inevitable difficulties, challenges, pain. And then that metta naturally flowers as compassion. And to help orient the heart mind in that direction, the phrase is slightly different. So some that I use, I'm aware of your pain. I care about your pain. May your pain release. And may you know peace. So you might hear there's a slightly different flavor with the compassion phrases. And as we all know, life isn't only pain and suffering. There are also beautiful experiences, pleasant experiences. So the next Brahmavihāra is mudita, usually translated as sympathetic joy or appreciative joy. And this is again a quality that flowers quite naturally when the basic foundation of metta turns towards what's going well, turns towards life's successes and rewards and joys. And so some standard mudita phrases could be something like this. I appreciate your good qualities. I take joy in your good fortune. May your joy continue. May it grow. May it lead to ever deepening ease and freedom. And then the 4th Brahmavihāra, equanimity, is what develops when compassion and appreciative joy are both equally strong. And we can meet whatever life brings us without getting caught in reactivity. So just a few sample phrases for developing equanimity. May I open to how it is right now, because this is how it is right now. That's one that comes from Kamala Masters. Some of you know she's a Dharma teacher based in Hawaii. We can also practice equanimity in relation to other people. And in that case, the standard phrases invite us to release that very common desire to try to control people. So some standard phrases: I care about you, but I cannot live your life for you. Your happiness or unhappiness depends upon your actions, not upon my wishes for you. So that's a very quick overview of how these 4 Brahmavihāra are usually practiced in pretty structured, formal, methodical way to develop concentration. However, for many people, that way of practicing with them not so accessible in daily life. And this is a pity, because most of us could really benefit from having more access to these skillful qualities of heart and mind right there in the midst of our relationships with our families, our neighborhoods, our sanghas, our workplaces. So tonight I wanted to offer some slightly different ways of approaching these qualities, hopefully to make them more available when we really need them. And perhaps along the way we might possibly convert any of you who might be metta skeptics, so that you can experience some of the benefits of these practices. So I say that because I myself used to be a pretty hardcore metta skeptic, and it took a while, but eventually, grudgingly, I started to realize just how necessary these qualities are to get the full benefit of insight practice. So my starting point for exploring these different ways comes from a method that the German scholar monk Bhikkhu Anālio has popularized. You probably know of him. And he did research on how the Brahmavihāra were practiced at the time of the Buddha. And back then, from what we understand, instead of using words and phrases and categories of people, the method was to simply abide with a heart imbued with kindness, and then let that kindness pervade in every direction around us. And then the same for compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, slightly similar to the instructions, the guidance I gave just before. So this method is what I call the radiating energy method. And for some people it's easier because it doesn't use words, it doesn't use concepts. It's less likely to become mechanical or rote. And it doesn't involve thinking about actual people in our lives, which can quickly get us entangled in reactivity if the mindfulness isn't strong. So given that there are these different ways of cultivating the Brahmavihāra, and given that the radiating energy method focuses more on the energetic, embodied quality, in my own practice, I started tuning into the particular energetic effects of each Brahmavihāra to try and get a sense of how those healing effects can be accessed more easily in daily life. So I think these days, most people lead pretty busy, full lives, and not everyone has the time to spend 30 to 45 minutes a day reciting the phrases. In fact, that can actually feel quite busy-making if we're already stressed. So trying to bring to mind the phrases and the person we're working with, and at the same time, pay attention to whether the metta is developing or not, and put aside the hindrances, and all the while trying not to think about our to-do list. It can feel like a lot of work, sometimes for not much reward. So what I've tried to do here is simplify the practice and tune into their beneficial energy so that we can more easily access it through the day as well as in formal meditation. And so hopefully recognizing the kind of energetic signature of each quality can help to tune into it and strengthen it. So if you're familiar with the talk title that I offered, I've paired each of the 4 Brahmavihāra with an energetic quality that's both the fruit of that practice and at the same time something that supports it. And to try to help those qualities be easier to remember, each one starts with the letter R. So I've been engaging with metta as a quality of rest, compassion as a quality of resilience, appreciative joy as the renewal of energy, and equanimity as release, release of whatever's getting in the way of inner peace. So these four qualities of rest, resilience, renewal, release, they're what support the Brahmavihāra to emerge in daily life, and they're also the benefits that come as those qualities get stronger. So to get a sense of that, let's just look at the first one, metta, in a bit more detail now. So with metta, I've chosen to focus on the quality of rest that it offers. At the same time, I think that quality of rest is needed for us to access kindness at all. I don't know about for any of you, but for me, it's much harder to evoke kindness and warmth and friendliness and goodwill unless I'm feeling some degree of ease and relaxation. So that's why in the instructions before, I invited us to tune into our own well-being and rest there before we try to offer metta to others. And this quality works the other way too. Perhaps you had a taste of that earlier. When I am able to access kindness, it brings a natural feeling of rest with it, a sense of contentment, steadiness, and ease that I can relax into. Now, I don't want to assume that my experience is true for all of you, so we'll be doing some experiential contemplations over the course of this talk. And so just now I invite you to we'll take a few minutes, and I just invite you to bring to mind a recent time when you did experience some kindness. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Maybe someone let you in the grocery line, something like that. So just for a moment, let your eyes close. See if there is a particular example of either receiving kindness or maybe offering kindness. As you connect with that memory, just staying with it for a few moments. Remembering where you were, who you were with, what happened. And then turn your attention to your body and just see any effect that tuning into kindness might be having there. Maybe there's just a slight softening around the eyes. Maybe a slight trace of a smile. Some softening in the shoulders, or breathing a little more deeply. Just exploring what's true for you without trying to manufacture anything. Just see if there might be a sense of ease, of rest that connecting to kindness offers. Okay, so just as an example from my own life, I was with my mother the other week, and she has dementia and physical challenges. It's pretty hard for her to stand or to walk without a walking frame. And I had to take her out for a medical appointment. And it was hard to find anywhere to park, so I had to drop her off and park nearby. And when I came back a couple of minutes later, she was standing on the edge of the road, looking confused, leaning on her walker. And as I was coming towards her, a homeless man came up and just asked her if she needed help to cross the road. And just that little interaction between my mother and this man who looked like a rough sleeper, I just felt my shoulders drop a little bit, even though I hadn't been aware of feeling tense. And maybe some of you noticed something similar when you touched into kindness just then. And if we had more time, we could stay with that feeling and rest in it. Because what that resting does is actually imprint the quality on our nervous system. And the more we can do that, the easier it is to find it again. And actually, in the language of the Buddha's discourses, the suttas, many of the words that are used in conjunction with the Brahmaviharas, they're words like abiding, dwelling, pervading, saturating. So there's a sense that with all of these skillful qualities, we want to stay in them as best we can, dwell there, rest there, so that over time they become more and more our true home, you could say. And as I've been emphasizing, it works the other way too. It's much easier to access metta from a state of rest than from busyness. So, maybe it wasn't a coincidence that the person who was willing to help my mother, at least as far as I could tell, was a homeless person. He wasn't busy, he wasn't rushing to work, he didn't have appointments he had to get to. He had time just to offer that service. So this idea of resting, maybe that can give us permission to let ourselves rest more fully in those moments when we aren't quite so busy, and to linger, to dwell in kindness. Now, this is actually a whole practice in and of itself, just to find those gaps between the busyness and to consciously stop for a minute or two instead of jumping to the next thing and the next and the next and the next. And that too is a form of metta, to develop that habit of pausing between activities. It gives us a little bit of, you could say, micro relief from the agitation of busyness. And over time, it gets easier to slow, to stop the buildup of stress and agitation, which itself is a kind of kindness. Now, it's possible you might think, well, tiny moments, what good can those do? But I just encourage you to suspend disbelief, give it a try. You may be familiar with the famous lines from the Dhammapada. Think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good. So drop by drop, our hearts and minds begin to absorb these metta moments. They gradually soften and open, and it becomes more easy to rest in kindness. Now, just a caution here. I know, mainstream society is so obsessed with productivity and doing and achieving and gaining, and perhaps some of you, it's hard not to bring this even into our Dharma practice. So you might hear this and think, oh, now I'm supposed to fill every spare moment with metta or compassion, whatever, and then make this whole thing into a self-improvement project so that I become a kinder person. So I really encourage you to try not to do that if that's your tendency, and instead approach this as a kind of play. See if you can play with these suggestions, play with an attitude of kind curiosity rather than any kind of pressure. So in my own practice recently, I've been experimenting as often as I remember through the day just to drop in the word kind with a question mark. Not as an order, but a silent question. Kind? Kind? You might try it right now. Kind? And notice if there's any response. Sometimes there's a sense of recognition, relief, rest. Others times, maybe it doesn't have any effect. Still other times, there might be a response of no, not kind, maybe even less polite than that. Again, in my own experience, sometimes the mind can be like a rebellious 2-year-old. And as I think most of you know, the Brahmavihāra practices are known to at times bring up the opposites of the qualities we're aiming for. This is not wrong or a problem, it's actually what they're designed to do. We have to see what gets in the way in order to be able to release it. So I want to normalize this because I speak to so many people who are put off by metta practice because they sit down with some belief that they're supposed to be cultivating boundless kindness, and instead they find themselves seething with petty resentments or bored out of their brains or completely numb and shut down. And so this, to me, is where we really need all 4 of the heart qualities, not just the first one, metta. Because if we encounter some resistance to kindness and we just keep pushing it, generally that just strengthens aversion and the tendency to give up, thinking that either we can't do it or the practice doesn't work. So if this is happening for you, it can be helpful to experiment with the second Brahmavihāra, which is compassion, particularly in the form of self-compassion. So when resistance to metta comes up, if we stay with it, if we gently explore it, underneath that energetic no, there's usually some kind of anger or fear or hurt. And that anger or fear or hurt could benefit from the energy of compassion. And as I mentioned earlier, compassion is what can flower naturally when metta meets pain of any kind. For most of us, though, this is a training because it's pretty counterintuitive to turn towards pain and to let ourselves feel it, even if it's just for a moment or two. To some extent, we are hardwired to avoid pain. And so what we usually habitually do is contract, close down, resist, brace against the pain, which energetically has the effect of making us hard and tight and brittle, all of which makes the pain feel worse. This is why I've paired compassion with resilience, the opposite of brittleness. Because we have such strong defenses against acknowledging pain, we're often in denial of it, don't even recognize it. But if we can train ourselves to notice when there is that stiffening, resisting, bracing, right there's an energetic clue that there's probably we're trying to avoid pain of some kind. And so turning towards the resilience of compassion is probably going to be beneficial. Now, it definitely takes practice to keep gently turning towards what's difficult without either collapsing into overwhelm or just running away. So compassion does benefit from regular practice. Maybe even at the beginning of the day, perhaps at the end, just 5 minutes tuning in. It's a little bit like physically training our muscles. We need to gradually strengthen and stretch them so they do become more resilient, and rather than metaphorically trying to pick up that 100-pound weight when there's some kind of crisis. So again, instead of just hearing about this connection, let's see if we can get a more direct sense of it. So again, just for a few moments, I invite you just to see if you can remember a recent time when there was some kind of physical or emotional pain. Preferably not something super intense, something that you have some capacity just to stay with for a moment. Just letting your eyes close if that's okay, and sensing into that experience. Possibly even the invitation to do that, you might notice a little resistance somewhere. Perhaps a sense of stiffening or pulling away. Might show up as a slight frown on the face. Just tuning in and seeing if there is, alongside that stiffening and resistance, capacity to find resilience, flexibility, soften, relax that tension or contraction. Consciously soften the muscles around the eyes. Let the shoulders release. Take a deeper breath. Or if it's helpful, you might experiment with the phrases. I'm aware of this pain. I care about this pain. May this pain release. And may I know peace. So as you take in these words and the invitation to orient to resilience, just notice if there might be a little more ease. softening, letting go of tension. And appreciate that as the resilience of compassion. Thank you. So again, this is a huge topic, and we'll have to save exploring it a little more fully for another time, because I definitely want to touch into the next Brahmavihāra now, which is mudita, or appreciative joy, the capacity to celebrate what's going well, because this is such a powerful resource to balance out compassion if we find ourselves sinking into the near enemy of compassion, which is overwhelm or grief. So traditionally, in the insight tradition, mudita has been taught as a quality of happiness for other people's happiness. And in the reciting phrases method, we usually exclude ourselves from this practice. But I learned that this way of doing it actually comes from a later development in Buddhism. And originally, the term mudita just meant gladness, simple gladness. And there's no sense that it had to be for someone else. So mudita for me has flavors of gladness, of appreciation and gratitude. And as I said, that can be a powerful antidote to getting lost in misery. Yet for many people, this is perhaps the most underdeveloped of the four qualities. I think this might be partly because of the mind's inbuilt negativity bias. It's well known now that our brains have an evolutionary bias towards paying more attention to what's unpleasant, potentially harmful, and to what's pleasant and beneficial. And this bias has helped us to survive, but it has its downsides. And unfortunately, it operates collectively too. So we see this in the media, how much of the news feed just fixates on misery and crises and tragedy. It's also well known how in social media, the big tech companies, they deliberately manipulate us into anger and fear in order to keep our attention there for longer and increase their revenue. So although perhaps for some of you hearing about mudita might seem naive when there's so much difficulty in the world, to me, more and more, I see it as an act of resistance or rebellion even to actively take in the good. So given the epidemic of stress and of anxiety and depression that so many people are dealing with these days, the skill of turning towards the good, we need the antidote of mudita more than ever. And taking in small moments of happiness, delight, maybe even joy, that helps to strengthen our emotional immune systems so that we have more capacity to deal with all the other stuff. So again, just to be clear, this is not about ignoring the reality of the challenges we're dealing with. It's not about getting lost in wishful thinking or fantasizing our way out of distress. It's instead inviting us to open to the full range of what life offers us. As they say in the Taoist tradition, the 10,000 sorrows and the 10,000 joys. And even in the most painful situations, if we look more carefully, we can usually find a few small things to appreciate that bring moments of relief. And this is why I pair mudita with the quality of renewal. So learning to appreciate what's going well, it refreshes, restores, rejuvenates us so that we're better equipped to deal with challenges. So again, just briefly, let's see if we can get a direct sense of that. This time, as you take your attention inwards, see if you can touch into a recent time when something went well in your life, is going well. Anything at all in this moment that you can appreciate, feel a sense of gratitude for. Just tuning into what's true for you. Any small things that you feel some sense of appreciation for. And noticing the energetic effect of that on the body. the heart, the mind. Perhaps there's a slight smile on the face, or an overall sense of lightening or uplift, expansiveness. Subtle sense of your energy being refreshed or revived or renewed. Thank you. So again, there's a lot to explore here, but I do want to complete this cycle by looking a little bit about equanimity now. This one, I think, for most people is less obvious than the others because it can be quite subtle, even elusive. But it basically means balance, the capacity to stay steady and balanced in the face of life's inevitable ups and downs. So you might have a sense then of how compassion and mudita, when they're developed together, they powerfully support equanimity. Compassion trains us to meet pain with care. And appreciative joy trains us to meet joy without clinging. So we're learning how to open to the full spectrum of life and stay steady with what is, whatever that is. Now, sometimes when people hear equanimity described as non-reactivity, they mistakenly think that this is somehow about trying to make ourselves an inert lump of rock, or it's about trying to suppress our natural personality and become a bland, colorless no one. So I think it's important to understand here the distinction between reaction and response. So by reaction, I mean more that habitual, unconscious tendency to do something, like the well-known knee-jerk reaction. It's a reaction that has almost no awareness to it. It's just coming from conditioning. Response, on the other hand, is a conscious, considered action grounded in mindfulness and understanding. And the power of equanimity is that it releases our habitual reactivity, so that instead we can find a wise response. And this is why I pair equanimity with the energetic quality of release. So when we are able to let go of old unconscious patterns, it becomes more possible to respond from a place of fresh, new understanding. Unfortunately, though, most people, when we start training in equanimity, what we come into contact with is all the things that we don't want, all the ways that we don't accept what is. So when we, for example, explore one of the phrases I used earlier, may I open to how it is right now, because this is how it is right now. Sometimes what we discover is all the ways of wanting, liking, clinging, not wanting, not liking, resisting, and all the physical effects of that push and pull on the body, the heart, the mind, usually showing up as different forms of tension. So again, understanding equanimity as release is an invitation to soften that tension. It might not fully release, but we definitely can't force this process, but we're able to soften just a little, and to that extent experience a little more ease as a result. And one of the challenges with this quality is, at least in terms of mainstream society, there's almost an addiction to drama. We may not realize just how much we're addicted to the highs and lows of life. So this quieter, more steady middle ground, it can feel elusive at first. So let's do one more experiment and just see if we can get a small taste of this. So this time I invite you to begin with actually the opposite of equanimity, a time when you had some kind of reaction. Not a huge one, but just when you got activated, maybe in the last week or so, wanting or not wanting in some way. See if you can bring to mind that memory situation. Maybe some of the emotions or habitual thought patterns that got activated. And as you stay with that, just noticing the impact on the body, that energetic feeling of pushing or pulling, what it's like to be in the grip of that reactivity. And then turning to equanimity as the invitation to release. May I open to how it is right now? Because this is how it is right now. And just seeing if some of that energetic tension might release a little. Release in the body. Release in the heart mind. Breathing out and inclining towards that energy of release. Relax, softening and letting go. And if that's a little more challenging and nothing much seems to be happening, right there is an opportunity to orient to equanimity. Opening to how it is right now. Because this is how it is right now. Okay, so thank you for being willing to give that a try. For some of you that may have been a little less clear, but I can't emphasize enough that these practices are trainings, and it just takes time, practice, and of course lots of patience to start to recognize their signature qualities. But hopefully this admittedly pretty quick tour of all four of these heart qualities, hopefully it can help make them more accessible in daily life.